Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, May 31st. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we've got some news and notes, a big promotion in Atlanta as AJ Smith-Shawver joins the bullpen, at least for now. Some longer-term questions there. Shawver's a good nickname. It really is. Injuries in Detroit to Eduardo Rodriguez and Riley Greene. Unfortunate because both players were having very good seasons. Harrison Bader goes back on the IL. We had some pitch-specific questions that were coming in about Grayson Rodriguez in the wake of his demotion, so we'll address those a bit on today's show. Figured we'd also take a look at the Second Chance League surprises I mentioned on yesterday's show. There have been a handful of drafts over at the NFBC that are for the rest of the season going forward, so we'll talk about some of the big movers that really have caught our eye, and we will get to the mailbag questions that we did not get to on the Tuesday episode, specifically a question about Nolan Gorman. So let's begin today, with AJ Smith-Shawver. It's a bullpen role for now, but it's pretty clearly a starter's arsenal. And long term, this is a guy that we're likely going to see in the middle or even possibly closer to the front of the Atlanta rotation.
Yeah, pretty excited about him. The minor league stuff plus suggests that he's got an elite fastball. The scouting has been positive about his breaking balls. The results have been through the roof. The only asterisk I have is a strange thing where the Fangraph scouting grade on the curveball is a 40 present, 50 future. The stuff plus on it is not great in a very small sample. And other people have mentioned that it's really big movement. So I wonder if it's just such a big curveball. He also didn't use it very much in AAA. I don't know if that's because he's sort of transitioning to relieving or focusing on his best pitches. But I am intrigued to see the curveball, even if it's not his best pitch. I think he's more fastball. What I saw, fastball, cutter, slider. So I wonder if it's sort of fastball, gyro, slider, and sweeper, if that's the sort of general grouping that he's got. But in any case, the fastball is elite. The breaking balls have performed really well, and he's here.
And the big questions for Atlanta have been in that back end of the rotation, thanks to the injury to Max Fried and the injury to Kyle Wright. Missing two of their starters has left them in a more vulnerable position. Bryce Elder, of course, you guys talked a lot about him, I think last Thursday while I was out. The performance versus the underlying numbers is a huge disparity there. Even if you think Bryce Elder will continue to exceed expectations, he probably won't exceed them by this much. Jared Schuster, kind of questionable as a back-end starter, at least in the short term. And then Michael Soroka, coming off the two Achilles injuries, just finally made it back. I thought he looked okay in that first start back against Oakland, so I'm really curious to see what the next couple of turns bring for him. But for a team that has legitimate World Series aspirations, there are some shorter-term issues in terms of getting quality innings every fifth day, especially from those back-end guys. So how they use Smith-Shawver, probably multi-inning relief, probably piggybacking in some form or often pitching behind one of Schuster or Elder or Soroka.
I think it makes a lot of sense that we might actually see him tonight. Jared Schuster might be pitching for his roster spot if I sort of read between the lines here a little bit. Elder, no matter what you think of his StatCast page or his Stuff Plus numbers or whatever, I think has shown enough competence to be a number 5. Fried's on his way back. Soroka will probably get some leash no matter how he's pitching. So Schuster and Smith-Shawver seem like the guys who are going to be short-term replacements. If this rotation's fully healthy, I would expect it to be Morton, Strider, Fried, Soroka, and Elder. But I will say, I think Smith-Shawver has the stuff to maybe unseat Elder. The projections all expect a mid-4s ERA for Bryce Elder going forward. That's what I personally sort of expect. That's what he did in AAA. And so there's even a little bit of daylight for Smith-Shawver to take the 5th spot from Elder. And the last bit of daylight that Smith-Shawver has is that Soroka's stuff wasn't all the way back. His changeup performed pretty poorly in the model and has been flatter since the injury. His changeup used to have more depth. Now his changeup has less depth than his sinker, which is just weird. And so far, weird bad, according to the model. I know Jerry Moschino's Stuff Plus model that's out there on Twitter. He was saying that his model liked it and said it was weird good. In any case, it's a straight change in a league where straight changes are not in vogue. And so Soroka is an interesting character. He before wasn't a stuff monster, even in 2020, but he always has located well and made the most out of what he does have. So I'm interested to see if maybe Atlanta has some secret sauce here with Elder and Soroka beating models.
Yeah, with Soroka, four-seamer in that first start back was at 93.3. He mixes the four-seamer with the sinker, a changeup, and a slider. He kind of had an even mix of those four pitches, though. Nothing over 27% usage across the board. And the sinker and the changeup look so similar when you watch them.
They really are.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, but there's a 10-mile-an-hour gap, so that's that straight change, thing. And it might be enough. Especially if he locates it well, but he didn't really necessarily locate that well in his first start either. So, and his extension is totally different. He has changed his delivery some during the time back. So just a crazy story for him. So of course I'm rooting for him. I don't know that I'm dropping really heavy coin on him. I'm a stuffist, and I'd rather spend on Bobby Miller.
Yeah, if that's an option, I'm right there with you. I think the problem is if you emptied the piggy bank for any one of Mason Miller or Taj Bradley or Yuri Perez, you didn't have the hammer bids available for Bobby Miller, which is, the unfortunate part of not knowing exactly who's coming up and when they're coming up. You have to sort of guess, like, is this the best it's going to be? Do I want the extra couple of starts from the guys that come up in late April, early May versus the guys that come up a little later? We play that game every single year, but I'm with you. There's a pretty big gap between those two guys from just a pure skills perspective. Let's get to the Tigers injury situations. Eduardo Rodriguez, who we talked about maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago on the show, as someone that wasn't really doing anything different compared to past years when he's been pretty erratic. But this year, 2.13 ERA, 0.98 whip, 67 Ks and 67 and 2/3 innings. Unfortunately, he suffered a left index finger pulley rupture. This injury has occurred to other pitchers before. It is a little bit unusual. We don't hear of it very often, but this is probably a 2-month injury based on the handful of past injuries. I think Adam Wainwright was one of the players that have dealt with this in the past.
It's a ligament injury, right? So
it's a serious problem. So,
yeah.
And it's his pitching hand. So it's going to be, again, probably months as opposed to weeks. And this is a big blow for the Tigers because even if they weren't going anywhere this year, I think Rodriguez was the kind of starter that could have been moved at the trade deadline. If he's not healthy before then, that probably eliminates the possibility of dealing him. Obviously, bad news for player himself, bad news for fantasy players, just bad news all around, especially because the Tigers still have a lot of their young starters working their way back from injuries. They don't have a Casey Mize or a Tarik Skubal or any of those guys quite ready to step back into the rotation.
Well, Skubal's about to start a rehab assignment. I don't know how long that's going to be, though. He just threw a live batting practice yesterday, so you'd have to expect at least a 2-weeker. I don't think he can just jump in there. So for at least 2 to 3 weeks, I would say that they are a starter short. Spencer Turnbull with the fake neck injury. I don't know. He is not. He has yet to resume throwing, but he had been on his way to the minor leagues before that. I don't think Joey Wentz is a quality major league starting pitcher. And Matt Manning threw a bullpen early this week and has some quality concerns of his own. So this this is a bad injury for the Tigers, who are amazingly in second place. I was surprised to see that. I thought they were having a bad year, which those two things may not be completely incompatible with each other.
It's only May 31st. They could still have a bad year.
And also, they're in a division where they are below 500 and in second place.
Yeah, it says a lot about the state of the AL Central right now. Even though I mean, I'm on board with the idea that they're a lot better. With Skubal, it probably is a full, almost a max duration rehab assignment. He's coming off that flexor tendon surgery, so I wouldn't be surprised if it took him all of June to get stretched out again, and maybe by the end of the month he's activated. That gives him a lift for sure. He'll be in their starting five once he's healthy enough. Probably going to be someone that people are picking up in leagues a couple of weeks before he returns. Last year, the location numbers were better for Skubal. I'm surprised that the model didn't like the pitches because he's been so good at racking up strikeouts throughout his career, especially in the minors, had some really gross strikeout rates. The big issue for Skubal his first two seasons, or parts of the first two seasons he was in the big leagues, were home runs. And he seemingly fixed that last season. Got a lot of balls on the ground, cut the home run rate, kept the walks under control. And even if he doesn't get back to the ridiculous strikeout rates that we saw in the minor leagues, he looked like a quality big league starter. So I think his return is actually a pretty big one to our player pool and for the Tigers if they are going to hang around in that AL Central race longer than people expect.
Yeah, I'm not going to bet against Skubal. And one thing I do like about Tigers pitchers is I will always draft them or pay for them a little bit better than the stuff model because I think that's still a pitcher's park. And I think it's a nice light landing. Like Lorenzen looks like sort of meh in the model, but he's been pretty useful at home. And if you play the careful start game with him, I think you can get value out of him. Here's a name that may end up, because I'm reading between the lines here and trying to figure out what the corresponding move for Eduardo Rodriguez is. I don't know if they've announced something. But there's a possibility for me that Reese Olson gets a chance. And I know his minor league numbers in terms of results haven't been great, but if you look beyond that a little bit and just look at his 2022 and 2023 years between, in the lens of K minus BB, you've got a guy who has about a 30% strikeout rate and a 10% walk rate, 9% walk rate. That's actually very exciting. Some of the things that he had problems with might be mitigated by the park in terms of home runs and BABIP allowed. I mean, BABIP allowed is something that can be a problem when their defenders in the minor leagues are bad and then they get better in the major leagues. And then lastly, by Stuff Plus, 105 Stuff Plus, 103 Location Plus, despite the high walk rates. Now, that can be obscured by poor umpiring, poor framing by minor league catchers. And Hunter Brown had a similar thing where he had a really bad reputation for command, some bad walk rates in minor leagues, has not really had that problem in the major leagues, and Location Plus presaged that. So I would say that Reese Olson may have some improvement in his walk rate in the major leagues. If he retains some of that strikeout rate, he could beat his projections, which are already pretty decent. A 4.2 from some places, a 4.8 from the bat, who has the best idea of the current run environment, but the bat is always pretty harsh on rookies. So if you see a good situation, you hear Reese Olson is up, and you can identify a start where he's home or something like that. That's a name I would put under my hat.
Yeah, probably cheaper than a lot of the other pitchers we've been chasing this year, too, because the prospect community is not as hyped by Olson as they are by some of those other pitchers that we've seen. But good results last year for sure. Interesting, too, to point out that the AAA leagues, both AAA leagues, have been using the automated balls and strikes system. The International League, in which the Tigers AAA team plays, started using it in late April. So both have had it now for over a month. We have seen walk rates tick up for obviously for hitters and pitchers because walks are up in general. So keep that in mind too when you see a walk rate spike at AAA this year. That could be part of what's going on. It might not be entirely a command issue. And because of the park, I'm right there with you. Look at the StatCast park factors, rolling 3-year average. Comerica Park still right there safely in the blue, 24th in park factor. So one of the more pitcher-friendly venues.
What his pitch mix is in the minors. There's often we saw with Taj Bradley, go to the minor leagues and work on your inconsistent fastball command. And, he throws 80% fastballs in the minor leagues. And you're like, okay. But then when you get to the major leagues, it's like, no, we want to win today. And you don't really have great command of your fastball. So, hey, let's go with 40%, 50% cutters and curves, which you seem to land better. The Fangraphs prospect TLDR on Olson is he doesn't have great fastball command. Well, what if he comes to the major leagues and they call 35% sliders, and he hasn't been throwing that many in the minors, and he can actually land the sliders. So I'm just saying the location plus does not suggest somebody that has 30 command, as they say on Fangraphs. So I'm interested in that. And it reminds me a little bit of the Louis Varland situation where it's maybe this guy's a little better than people thought.
Right. And those players make a pretty big difference on the margins. By the way, Comerica Park, in terms of home run park factor, it is the most pitcher-friendly park in the entire league by the StatCast park factors.
Can you change that to 1 year?
Just this year, 3-year rolling. No, hit update, hit the sort button, and it is, it's 22nd for this year only. So it's still pitcher friendly.
Yeah.
With a home run park factor of 87. So still not bad.
Yeah.
So keep on rolling those Tigers for those home starts when you get the opportunity. Sticking with the Tigers for another few minutes, Riley Greene has a stress fracture in his tibia. I have not seen a timetable kind of poking around. I don't think this is a minimum IL stint situation. I also don't think it's necessarily a season-ending situation, but a lot of uncertainty for the time being. So hopefully in the next few days, we'll get some clarity on just how long Riley Greene will be sidelined by this injury.
It's a really finicky sort of thing. I think it has to do with how much separation there is. If there's actually, some separation, then the bone has to kind of grow together. But generally, from what I understand, blood flows to bone better than ligaments, which surprises me, but
not intuitive for me as someone who didn't study the human body in college.
Right. Yeah. So there's a chance this isn't that big a deal, but there's also, just the fact it is a stress fracture. It's like a repetitive motion thing. So it's what were you doing? There's something you were doing that was causing that, and if we'd let you back out there again, without really fully diagnosing you, then you may just sort of undergo that stress again and do something to it. So.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because Riley Greene was putting together a nice season, a 296 average, a 362 OBP. The power was up to a 443 slug, 5 homers in 52 games, which in that park, you're on a mid to high teens pace in that category. And he was 6 for 6 as a base stealer, showing some improvement in an area where he was just 1 for 5 as a rookie a season ago. So really helping in 5 categories. And as a very young player, just a guy who's 22 years old, doesn't turn 23 until basically the end of this season in late September, was quietly having that step forward sort of breakout year that people were hoping for.
Yeah, R.I.P. I can't afford to lose any more bold predictions, but this would have been the one that got me to 3. It's unfortunate. I don't think I'm going to get to 3 this year, but the interesting thing about him is that he's always had that max EV, and he's just getting to that power better, over time, and that there's some corollary to that to the minor leagues. So, he's a guy that needs to shave off some ground balls even going forward, but that also allows him to hit the ball hard. And make the most of his balls in play. And he's had very high BABIPs his whole life because, he is a right-hander. Nope, he's not. He's a left-hander that can't get shifted anymore like he used to be able to. And he's able to, hit in those good angles. He's not hitting the ball in the air 50% of the time. And make just enough contact to put the ball in play. And then he has good legs. So, he's a guy who's going to run upper half BABIPs. And if you see, even his projections are for a 350 BABIP. So he's a guy who's going to make the most out of the contact that he puts out there. And I'm still excited about him long term. I think this will be a tough one for the Tigers. And if we're playing the depth chart game, Nick Monton is going to get more playing time. I don't know, because Matt Vierling is hurt too. And so there's, maybe is there an opening for a call up? It's too early for Colt Keith, right?
Well, they brought up Jake Marisnik,
Which is just not exciting at all.
right? Organizational depth. I mean, I think the two position player prospects you look at with the Tigers, at least guys that are more highly regarded, are Colt Keith and Justin Henry Malloy, who they acquired from Atlanta back during the winter. Keith's at Double-A right now. He's 21, the left-handed bat. There's some questions about where he fits in defensively, but I don't think there's any doubt about what he can do with the stick. And this is a team that
you're a little bit young, but hey, we're in second place. Let's try this.
Why not? Why not give it a shot at this point?
And give him a chance to take some lumps in the major leagues. You can always reset whatever service time you give him, right? Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that Parker Meadows, who has some things going in his favor, has run into a bit of a buzzsaw in AAA. This was somebody that was kind of toolsy and putting things together was the thought, and had some good looks in the AFL. But I don't know what is a failure. The Fangraphs grades are most pessimistic about his hit tool, but his strikeout rate isn't necessarily the problem. But hit tool is not just strikeout rate. So the max EV 111 in AAA, I mean, at least that's average-ish power, raw power. He's got plus speed. Would they try Parker Meadows just because he's an outfielder and he plays center field and he's close to the big leagues, even though he's not really quote unquote earned it, I guess?
It might. I mean, I think part of the problem with Colt Keith is that he's playing almost exclusively at third base. They've tried him at third, they've tried him at second, so I don't think they can really make that work as the corresponding move unless they're going to play Nick Maton in the outfield more often. I think you could probably try that. Yeah,
Maton's played all over. But, I mean, the Marisnik thing seems almost like we're going to keep Parker Meadows down, right? You don't have to trade for Marisnik if you just promote Parker Meadows and put him in center.
Yeah, and they do also move Zach McKinstry around, so you could play McKinstry less on the infield. So there's a path for Colt Keith as someone that could get a look.
Scope might benefit. I think that it's one of those deals where a lot of people might benefit and not a lot of them are going to be useful for our leagues. So I think in general, McKinstry, who's already owned in most places they should be owned, may benefit, but he was already kind of being an everyday guy. Maton, who I think he's an AL only type player, is going to benefit. I think Jonathan Scope is going to benefit, but I don't necessarily think he's going to get back to, where he was. He hasn't barreled the ball well, for, 3 years. And,
sad. It's just very sad.
Yeah. And he's last, what is this now? 600 plate appearances. He's been more than 40% worse than league average with a stick.
That's a player that you would designate for assignment if you're going to create a spot on the 40-man roster.
For Keith.
Yeah, I think that's the corresponding move you make at this point because he's in the final year of the 2-year deal. You've given him 2 months this year to show you that last season was a fluke and not just a full collapse, and he's done nothing really to convince you that he's still got something left in the tank. So if you're the Tigers, why keep putting him out there? Why keep him on the roster? There's just not a whole lot you can do with a player like that. So I think we could see Colt Keith. I think you're onto something here,
I mean, he's the one who's earned it. So I think what I would watch is if Maton starts playing center. Right? Or Badu plays center and Maton plays left. Kerry Carpenter's coming back. Did Kerry play center before?
Oh, this is a fun trivia game for you. Who has started a game in center field for the Tigers this season? Let's see how many you can name. There are.
I've just been looking at it. So, I mean, it's Badu.
It was actually only two players that have started in center field prior to today. There are two players that have started in center field because Riley Greene plays every day. And then you name the other one.
Greene and Madu?
Veerling before he got hurt. So when Veerling comes back, Veerling probably plays center.
And until then, Veerling's injury is a little bit short-termish. Kerry Carpenter hasn't played center field since 2021.
Yeah.
So Kerry Carpenter's not going to help, but he begins a rehab assignment. So what is this in the short term with Greene out? I think it's Kerry Carpenter in center. No, Kerry Carpenter, Matt Veerling when Veerling comes back, and you still have an opening in the outfield. Badu has not been playing well. Is he even in the major leagues? He is in the major leagues, but he's been playing better.
They're playing. So today, there's a game happening right now. They're playing the Rangers. Dane Dunning's a righty. So they're facing Badu's a righty
out there.
They put Badu in left, and they put McKinstry in right, and they played Marisnik and hit him ninth in center because Marisnik is a good defensive center fielder.
So they put McKinstry in the outfield. But that's when Veerling comes back, they can put Veerling in center, so they could run that most days. And then Carpenter can push Badu to the bench against he's a lefty too. Carpenter could push McKinstry to the infield.
I mean, I know it's the AL Central, but how is this team only 3 below 500 as it is currently constructed?
You think they should be more games under 500?
Yeah, I think just at a glance. Look,
just to clarify.
Yeah.
Nick Maton has not played center field since 2021.
And I don't know how you feel about Pythagorean win-loss, but Pythagorean win-loss has the Tigers at 21-32. So I'm not just being rude to the Tigers.
There's a bit of a question mark here in terms of organizationally. Do you just take the banked wins and just be like, hey, this is fun. Like we're in second place. Let's go for it. Or do you say, no, we're not very good. Let's continue playing like we're not very good, and just try to identify if Maton's going to be on our team next year, and if who else is going to be on our team next year.
Well,
short term.
This is probably something we're going to get into with a few other teams on 3-0, but for the Tigers, they have a sub 5% chance of making the playoffs and earning play today, according to the Fangraphs odds. Even in that division,
should be an aggressive seller.
I think they should still be an aggressive seller, and I think if they're
sell Badu,
especially in light of what just happened, if Erod and Riley Greene were healthy, those are two pretty important players. If you're going to exceed expectations, right? Both of those guys staying healthy and doing what they were doing over the bulk of what's left of the season was really important to them. And now that can't happen because of their injuries. I think if you were on the fence about it, that's enough to kind of swing you into the, play young guys. That's it's more just like, keep playing the young guys. If you're the Tigers, learn as much about the guys that you think are part of your future as you possibly can, while also upgrading the roster. The odds of Colt Keith being worse than Jonathan Scope are very low. So make that change. Put Colt Keith on the roster and play him instead of playing 28, 29, 30-year-old guys that are not part of your future.
Play Meadows over Marisnik.
Yeah, I think you should.
Who could you trade? Lorenzen? But then you're gonna have a terrible rotation.
You're not gonna get a whole lot out of most of this roster trade wise because it's not built for now. It just wasn't. It wasn't built that way.
Would you trade
Baez
Lang?
Is going nowhere. You could trade Lang because generally you think a guy like Lang is relatively easy to find or develop. But is trading Alex Lang going to change the long-term fortunes of the Tigers all that much? Probably not.
There's some sort of frenzy.
They need a frenzy.
Like people overpay for relievers.
Yeah, sure. So you could trade a guy like that and get someone back who helps you more later. But they're just kind of in the learning. It's learning as much as they can about the pieces they have and having a better idea of where their truest needs are for when their window is open again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in terms of like playing Scope and Marisnik, that's the two where I'm like, there's
Yeah, just don't do that and see what happens.
yeah.
That's all. A couple more injury news items to get to. Harrison Bader placed on the 10-day IL. I just want to see what would happen if Harrison Bader could stay completely healthy. We talked about this back in
It's killing me.
the outfield preview. The previous career high in plate appearances for Harrison Bader was 427. That was back in 2018. So he's got 3 seasons where he's been in the low 400 range for plate appearances. This is normal for him, unfortunately. He shows power and speed on a per game basis that makes you think that if he stays healthy for 600 plate appearances, you actually could see 20 plus homers and 20 plus steals. The skills are still there. He's doing it in a strange way this year. It's a 267, 295, 511 line, but not surprising to see him showing us more power with the move into Yankee Stadium for half his games.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that OBP needs to come up, but it has been up in the past. I mean, he's like one of these players where if you could smush together different aspects of his line from past years, you could put together a superstar. You know, you put together that 11% walk rate he in 2019 with his 13% strikeout rate this year. With his ISO from this year and his speed from last year, and
It's why we all keep getting hooked in and saying, "Yeah, maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the skills consolidation good health year."
This is the yeah. The injury seems real. They traded him. They traded for him while he was injured. They knew what they were getting, and I think that they thought they would have better depth. But Aaron Hicks is a Baltimore Oriole, and the corresponding move here was Franchy Cordero being up, which you don't want Franchy in center. So I guess what you're going to see is some IKF or Allen
IKF and Judge.
and Allen, Greg Allen, some.
Yep, you'll see Greg Allen. Greg Allen will play a little bit out there. IKF will play a little bit out there, and Aaron Judge will play out there.
I wonder how they parse that out. Let's see here. IKF has played 112 innings in center this year. No. Yep, 112 innings in center this year. That's 13 games. And he's acquitted himself averagely as he does everywhere.
I think he's a nice bench player to have. I really do. I just think when you get caught using him for 600 plate appearances, then you've probably missed somewhere.
This is strange. Jake Bauers. There's going to be some days where it's Jake Bauers, Greg Allen, and Willie Calhoun in the outfield.
Oh no, they don't. Willie Calhoun. Come on, how much are they playing Willie Calhoun in the outfield?
I'm just saying there could be a day when they do this, a getaway day or something. Calhoun's playing some. I keep saying his name in the pod. Let's see here. What does his game log say? Calhoun is playing. Look at that.
He's 3 games in right field. Row. Yeah, he's played 3 games in right. He's DHing a lot right now
because Stanton is hurt.
Right, and Stanton's not that far away from coming back.
So that my murderer's row outfield is probably not going to happen because even in that scenario, Calhoun would be DHing and Judge would be in the outfield.
This is pretty typical stuff for the Yankees.
It always happens to them at some point in the year, and they do it. Like Bowers has been all right. Like they do find guys. Like Franchy's okay. I'm not saying these guys are terrible players. It's just not what you drew up.
No, but they're still sitting just 5 games behind the Rays, despite the Rays' amazing start. They're only 4 games behind the Rays for projected wins for the rest of the season, and Carlos Rodon hasn't thrown a pitch for them yet. So there's the possibility they get him back. They just got Luis Severino back, so they're starting to put that rotation in place.
About to get Josh Donaldson back. That's going to change everything.
Harmony in the clubhouse will take a hit.
This is a good team. It's a good team, but there are times when you look out there and you're like, "What is this lineup? Like, what is happening here?" How do you take advantage of it? I think that all these kind of guys are great sort of bat streamers. Jake
Yep.
Bauers has really changed something. I've never seen, like, first of all, I've never seen a max EV like this. I've never seen a barrel rate like this. It's been a long time since we've seen a pull rate like this. He's much more of a three true outcome guy than he's ever been in his life. And to some extent, that's treating him well. So, he's a lefty that with the short porch, if the Yankees are home, I'm in on Bauers.
Yeah.
If Yankees are playing somebody who's not good at defending steals, I'm in on Gregory Allen. I think these guys are going to play a fair amount in the short term because when I look through this list, I only see Aaron Judge.
Yeah, I think there's a longer term thing the Yankees have done well with some of these depth players, going probably back to at least Gio Urshela, just finding players that are unheralded, turning them into those depth guys, using them to be the glue players throughout the regular season and getting pretty good results. Bauers having an 18.2% barrel rate is a surprise. I think we know Franchy Cordero, for as long as we've ever been interested in him as a big league player, has been one of those guys that could do fun StatCast things, but couldn't do basic baseball things that earn enough playing time, right? There was a lot of swing. There's always swing and miss in his profile too. That was the other part of why doesn't this work with Franchy? But the why teams keep taking a chance on him, that's easy to see too. He's got a 15% barrel rate as an up and down guy. And I think when you have guys that come up like that do damage, even if they're 2-3 times a week type players for you, that's helpful.
Yeah, if you get a homer or two a week, then you're like, all right.
Found money if you can make that actually work. So familiar place for the Yankees and a familiar place for Harrison Bader. Unfortunately, I was pretty pumped about what he was doing once he finally got healthy because I was willing to take on that risk back on draft day, and I thought I was right.
This guy's better than the rest. IKF.
It's so hard because IKF is exactly the type of real player that earns the playing time that you want them to give to Franchy because Franchy has the ceiling. So then you have to bet on the guy that you think has the much lower ceiling because you are more confident he's going to play.
Yeah. But Bauer seems like threading the needle between those things.
I would agree with that. I think of the
good enough
options
at all the different things that you're just going to put him out there.
But a 34.4% K rate. Yeah, I know you're getting to the power. Right. It's still ugly, even though it's better than it was for Jake Bauers. Let's talk about Grayson Rodriguez for another moment. He came up on yesterday's show briefly, and we were asked, I think it was Jay Thomas on Twitter that tweeted at us about Grayson Rodriguez's pitch mix and specifically issues with the cutter. And this is something you've written about. When I look at Grayson Rodriguez, I see a guy that actually is pretty fixable. Like, there's a lot to work with. The Orioles are showing us they can develop and tweak pitchers in ways that makes them a lot more effective. Tyler Wells being a really good example of that. And Rodriguez certainly brings a lot more in the kit to start with than Tyler Wells had when they brought Wells into the organization. So what did you see as you did the deep dive on Rodriguez's pitch mix and some of the issues he was experiencing? I know you mentioned tipping on yesterday's show, but how long do you think this demotion is going to last? And just how soon do you think we could really see Grayson Rodriguez put the pieces back together as he works through it at AAA?
Yeah, I mean, there's some scuttlebutt that there's some sort of Hawkeye identified pitching going on, tipping going on, where maybe some aspect of his delivery is different for the different pitches. But I see a real simple thing when I look through the line of, plus fastball by Stuff Plus, plus slider, plus curveball, average changeup, poor cutter by Stuff Plus. And he's really emphasized the cutter. And if you look at the results have not been good on the cutter. So I don't know why he's throwing the cutter so much, which just suggests to me that, there's something about his fastball that he doesn't want to throw it as much against lefties. And so he doesn't want, he can't just be a curve changeup guy against lefties. So he's brought this cutter in. I would say, okay, fine. Don't throw the cutter much against righties. He's throwing it too much against righties. Throw it, half, half the time you would throw your fastball against lefties, throw a cutter, use it sparingly, use it in that way. And become who you were against righties, dominate the righties with the fastball, the slider, the curve, and the change. So There are some command issues, but a 99 location plus again is not, bottom shelf command. It's not a problem that can't be fixed. So I would look through the Hawkeye and see if there was something that he was tipping. I would reduce the cutter usage, and I would identify a plan of attack against lefties.
Yeah, all things that are reasonably fixable. I mean, if you told me it's going to be 4 or 5 starts at AAA and then we're going to see Grayson Rodriguez again around the 4th of July or the All-Star break, I think that would make a lot of sense. I think in redraft leagues, it's really tough to hold somebody for a month when they're giving you nothing, especially when there's no certainty about the quality of the innings you're going to get once he comes back. But there's still so much to like in this profile long term. He would 100% fit into the I'm not playing for right now, but I'm close.
Next year, yeah.
I'm going to take my chance for next year because that innings total, the ceiling on that will go up even more so long as he avoids injury this year. That's the key to continuing to push that season workload up, is just keeping him on the field this year.
A couple thoughts too about how could someone that was performing so well in the minor leagues and had such great numbers come up and come to the big leagues and then have such a tough time. Derek Shelton last night at the ballpark talked about how sometimes players are dominating with less than perfect mechanics, or they're getting away with things in the minor leagues that the major leagues will not let them get away with, and as opposed and the stuff plus thing, it's an importance that it shows you the importance of how much your pitch mix matters. And his stuff plus was through the charts in the minor leagues. He wasn't throwing that cutter. So, but he did identify some shortcoming in the way his pitches fit together that he needed the cutter. So, it's not every pitching prospect works out. He could still not work out in the long run, but given what I see on some of these pitches, I think it's just finishing school. He's just got to make that last leap.
Yeah, and it's not like we've seen him even spend a full season at the AAA level yet. So it wouldn't be surprising if another month or two did the trick for Grayson Rodriguez. Let's get to some second chance league surprises. You mentioned your bold predictions earlier. One of your bold predictions was that Kevin Gausman would win the AL Cy Young, and I think that's one that looks pretty good. And I think what we're seeing in the second chance leagues over at the NFBC is that the market is buying into what Kevin Gausman is doing completely. He has made the leap from a lower end ace, someone that was maybe going in that pick 35 to 45 range in a lot of drafts at the end of draft season, to someone who now goes inside the top 15, kind of a fringy first rounder, second or third starting pitcher off the board. I think it was Strider, McClanahan, Gausman, if I remember the order correctly. This is legit. And I was worried about him a little bit last year, because we saw the whip jump up to a 1.24. It was the highest whip he'd posted since 2019. So I was wondering what was going to happen with another year of facing teams in the AL East. And I think he's answered all of those questions and then some, pushing the K rate up a bit, keeping some of the walk rate gains from last season, and keeping that home run rate in check. That's been a huge part of the last 3 seasons now for Kevin Gausman. The home runs that plagued him for the early part of his career really just don't seem like an issue anymore.
Yeah, I've got some projections and rankings coming out on Friday, and looking right now at the projections for the rest of season. 3.17 ERA, 29% projected strikeout rate. He's got a 3.03 ERA and a 32% strikeout rate. So, our model believes that he's doing exactly what he's earned. And so I'm fully in on the Gausman hype train. You mentioned that Corbin Burnes had dropped down a little bit, but not fully.
Yeah, it's not as much as you'd think. The range, there have been 4 drafts completed now as of Wednesday, and the earliest he'd gone was pick 17. The latest was pick 35. So kind of in the mid-20s, I think, is where it all averages out right now. It's not nearly as much of a drop as I would have expected, but I think one thing to keep in mind is some of the second chance leagues are gladiator leagues, which means there are no benches, and you have to just find guys who are completely healthy right now, who are performing right now. So I don't think it necessarily impacts Burnes in necessarily, but it's more the certainty
buying the
of
volume a
volume.
little bit,
Volume matters a lot in this
Yeah.
format. And I think there's still no doubt about Burns' volume. And I think people can pretty reasonably look at what he's done in the last 2 months and say, okay, if this is as bad as it gets skills-wise, it could be quite a bit worse. A 3.68 ERA and a 1.19 whip in this run environment is actually not that bad. And there's a very good chance that he's better than that the rest of the way. More likely than not, he's better than he has been so far going forward.
3.04 projected ERA, 29.5% strikeout rate. So our model says the strikeout rate is going to rise to meet his strikeout rates from the past, and that he's going to beat his K minus BB going forward. So this is exactly the kind of stuff that Stuff Plus was designed for. You look at K minus BB and you say he looks below average. You look at his stuff, he's easily above average. So I think he's going to perform to the back of his baseball card going forward. And I think, man, if I got him with a 32nd pick, I'd be pretty excited.
Yeah, imagine if you were in a 15-teamer coming back at that round 2, end of round 2, beginning of round 3 turn.
Thought, yeah.
And you went Acuna, Burns, and someone else, some other hitter that you like there.
Then you've got a nice 1-2 combo right there.
That's real nice. Joe Ryan makes the leap ADP wise, pick 34, range is like 19 to 44 overall. Added the sweeper. I mean, that's the thing, right? You add a pitch to something like what Joe Ryan already had. So this is a solid pitcher that we trust most of the time. Now he's got this extra weapon. This to me feels like a slight overcorrection. That's going to happen when you draft in season. I would be susceptible to this. If I were in the room drafting, what's happening so far would carry more weight than it probably should. But how much has Joe Ryan's ceiling changed for you with the addition of that sweeper?
Well, I hate Google Sheets, and I can't get you his projections. But and what's also interesting is not just a sweeper, or it's multiple sweepers. I had a really interesting conversation with Alex Fast about this over at Pitcher List, and so I do think that one thing that he's teaching me, Joe Ryan is teaching me, is that I love players with really good fastballs. Young pitchers with really good fastballs that have shown at least enough secondaries where you can dream on them and you can see how they might improve them. So if you're looking at Taj Bradley and you say, "Oh, the fastball command's not great," and are these other pitches that great? I don't know, man. I'm still betting on Taj Bradley. It's a great fastball. Bryce Miller, he's having some issues on the slider, not getting swings. Still a great fastball. Bobby Miller, great fastball. Tanner Bybee, great fastball. So, in this case, Joe Ryan, great fastball, and now the secondaries are meeting it. I think the being excited about him is worth it.
Going just a little off script for a minute, I'm thinking about Luis Medina because I'm sorting the Fangraphs fastball leaderboard, and if you watch Luis Medina, like there's stuff there. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of where's it going kind of built into that. We talked about this maybe a month ago. At a certain point, tools for hitters and just raw stuff for pitchers can be so good that you shouldn't give up on a guy. But if something is fundamentally flawed to the point that the tools can't really be unlocked or it's going to just take forever, let someone else go through the growing pains. Clearly, Luis Medina is the kind of guy, it's going to take a while if it happens. But where does he fall for you? Does he fall into that too risky category, or does he actually show so much raw stuff that you would actually bet on the profile, that the command could come around or get to an acceptable level to the point where he could make it as a starter?
94 location plus is really rough. I mean, that's 95, 96 is where I usually have the bottom shelf for starters. So I think he's a future reliever. 97 location plus on the fastball though, 98 on the slider. Maybe if he reduced usage of the curve and change and really tightened it up and just became more of a two-pitch pitcher, but then he becomes a two-pitch pitcher and has the issues that come along with that. So he's like a pickup or a throw-in.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious because I think he really pops on that fastball stuff or fastball scouting grade leaderboard they have over at Fangraphs. The other guy that kind of stands out on that list, by the way, is Dre Jameson. I know they're using him in the bullpen right now. I think he would also fit into our conversation from the Tuesday show this week. Players you want to trade for that probably wouldn't cost a lot and could help you in the not so distant future. It's not hard for me to look at that group of starters as it is currently constructed and still imagine a world in which Dre Jameson has a rotation spot to call his own. That is not hard to do in a rotation that features Tommy Henry and Zach Davies and a struggling Ryan Nelson, right? There's three reasonable paths into that rotation if Dre Jameson shows electric stuff in a multi-inning relief role again.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I think Brandon Pfaadt is going to stick. Quickly checks his Fangraphs page to find out he has not been demoted. He has been.
Yes.
Well, wrong on that one. Nice. I do think Brandon Pfaadt is going to come back, and I do think there'll be a rotation spot waiting for him because I do not believe in Tommy Henry. And as much as I like Ryan Nelson, the results have not been there. So I think that Dre Jameson has a window. The locations have not been good for him either. He has not been good at commanding it, and he's throwing harder, which has, is a benefit to him. But going up from 95 to 97, but that's related somewhat to the shorter stints, and it has not been good for his command. So, but somewhere in there could be a real optimal. It's a Harrison Bader thing almost, right? Where it's like, can we take the good velo and the good strikeout rates and good whiff rates and put them together with the good walk rates? Mm-hmm. If then you could have a real breakout on your hands. And so he's definitely a guy of interest and somebody I would have ahead of Medina for sure.
I would also say with Dre Jameson, I'd be surprised long term if we don't start to see more of the other pitches. We see a lot of fastball slider from him. That seems premature based on scouting reports and some of the expectations for him to have 4 pitches in the arsenal, more changeups, more curveballs. Something should be there. It shouldn't just be 2 pitches for Jameson if they want him to make it as a starter. So put him on the list as a longer term, easy to get player right now that could actually be in this rotation. Maybe in the second half of the season, a lot can change. They may just see him as their best option eventually. Injuries could open the door.
The curve is a 130 stuff plus curve, and he uses it 0.8% of the time. Now, of course, it could be a small sample thing, but there's enough promise there where I'd say, hey, let's try some curves.
And don't forget about the Amarillo-Reno combo for AA and AAA and what that does to D-backs pitchers.
And your head.
A lot of that still has to be kind of undone once they get to the big league level in Arizona. Here's one that hurts the pod. Esteury Ruiz, pick 66 in the second chance leagues so far. Range pretty tight too, pick 59 to pick 74. I think this is more of a question of, are you comfortable building teams with a guy that creates so much of his value from that category and really just leaves you in need of surplus power? If you do that early, that's a little different than doing it late. And I mean, if we didn't like Esteury Ruiz 125 picks later back in late March, I'm guessing you're not turning around on Esteury Ruiz and saying, I like this now.
I might.
Really?
Here's the difference. On a year-to-year basis, betting on this profile, I think, is as fraught with risk as betting on Miles Straw year-to-year.
Okay.
But within the year...
I can't believe this is happening.
Within the year, knowing that he's built this much of a runway for himself, almost I would say with certainty that he won't get sent down. With fairly good certainty that he's not going to strike out above league average rate, right?
Yeah, you could probably say that at this point.
I don't know. Those are things that you did not know going into the season.
Yeah, I mean, part of what makes him safe for the next few months is that they almost certainly won't have a better option to just throw out there in center
Right.
field.
He's one of the few good stories. Like they're going to have a league leader on their team.
Yeah, and you certainly can't say that about 2024. Who knows what happens to this roster going through another winter. There's still so much I don't like here. I think the Miles Straw comparison's pretty fair. I mean, I think when you look at the quality of contact, you're not drafting Esteury Ruiz because of the quality of contact, right? You're drafting him for speed first. You're hoping that the K rate is low enough and that he sprays the ball well enough to be good and average. What's interesting to me is that if you did the very lazy thing and sort of tripled up the counting stats, he'd be at 72 RBIs at season's end and 72 runs, which really isn't terrible, even though he has to lead off for that team to get to those numbers. But that's better than you'd expect for the almost zero power sort of player. And then, of course, you're talking about someone who's going to flirt with 80 steals. Even when steals are easier to find, 80 steal player is a pretty big difference maker. So maybe this is more of a roster construction preference. Are you comfortable getting the large percentage of your steals from one player? I've always been a little bit, in recent years, reluctant to go after a player who I thought was going to give me a third of my steals or even 50% of my steals, because if that player gets hurt, I'm taking a massive hit in the category. You're not going to find another player like this on the wire, most likely. So this to me feels like an even bigger overcorrection than Joe Ryan, even though I understand the process by which people get there. 27 for 31 as a base stealer with a 340 OBP, it's a lot of green lights, but as a frighteningly low hard hit percentage, 21.2% hard hit rate. Like, fine, you don't want to lift the ball because you can't. Okay, hit it harder than that more often. A 21.2% hard hit rate is a problem.
Yeah, I think it's it's possible that next year he hits 237, 316, 302 as Miles Straw is doing right now. I mean,
rest of season has that baked in too, though. 244, 300, 348. We're drafting a player with that slash line in the 60s.
That's the bad X rest of season.
That's the bad X. I mean, take the best projection rest of season.
323.
Yeah, 250, 324, 375 at pick 66. Even with a lot of steals, I don't know if I can bring myself to do that. Josh Lowe.
We have a little bit of a bias towards real life players, right? He's not a great real life player.
But I think that bias is generally okay, because I think playing time is critically important. It's an accumulation game when you're playing Roto. You try to max out everything possible. I don't know. Maybe there's a failure in logic for me with Ruiz, and maybe he's exceedingly valuable. Maybe he's the player that people years ago wanted Billy Hamilton to be, where he's good enough to keep the job, and he hits enough and gets on base enough to steal 70 or 80 bases, and he's fine if you build around him correctly. That could be the case, but I just don't think I'm committing to Esteury Ruiz if that's the new range in which he's going to be drafted. I think Josh Lowe is tougher. That one's a little bit trickier, right? He's a top 100 guy now in the second chance leagues.
Better
pick 78.
Player.
Better all-around player. Range is pick 71 to 94. More balanced production, of course. Similar problems exist if you look at the rest of season projections relative to what he has done, right? You're not going to see anything close to the line so far in what is expected to happen going forward by projection. But you see double-digit home runs. You see double-digit steals. Obviously, this is a Rays lineup that can score runs.
0-0.
Yeah. The interesting thing here is the K rate. You know, like, how much do you trust the improvements in the strikeout rate now that we're a third of the way into the season? And for what it's worth, Lowe's playing time share is a little smaller than some of the other guys that have been true everyday players to this point.
I also tell you this. I would believe the strikeout rate improvement a whole lot more if his swinging strike rate wasn't exactly the same. You know, it's a really strange thing that his walk rate went down, his swinging strike rate stayed the same, and his chase rate went up. And I know there's some compelling stuff in the heat maps about closing up the hole. but I would just venture that the strikeout rate creeps up over the course of the season to meet his swing strike rate. The swing strike rate is in a bigger sample. It's per pitch. And it looks exactly like it did before. And if you look at Josh Lowe's, rolling strikeout rate graph, which makes for great radio, we can all look at it together.
Unless you're driving, look at it later. Do not pull up graphs on Fangraphs while you're in the car as the driver.
He like really started the season with a 15% strikeout rate and like looked like a completely different person. For the last 25 games, his rolling strikeout rate has been 25% or higher. So I think if I put the over under somewhere for his strikeout rate rest of season, it would be north of 25.
Yeah, projections in 29 to 30% range.
Yeah, and that puts us down. So, projections aside, I'm just looking at what he's done and the rolling aspect of what he's done most recently, and it's pushing towards where he's been in the past. So I would say that, even if I am more rosy on him than the projections, I would say 27% strikeout rate from here on out. He's at 22.7. And I would not project a 300 batting average for someone with a 27% strikeout rate. Let's do that. Who else has a 27% strikeout rate? We've got 30 guys with a 27% strikeout rate or higher, and the highest batting average is Aaron Judge at 303, Riley Greene with that massive BABIP. And Mike Trout with a 277. So you've got basically 4 players above 270 and 27 players under 270. So I would say most likely I'd put the over under on the rest of season batting average for Josh Lowe at 250. And this is, I'm being a little bit more I'm being a little bit nicer to him than his projections.
Would you take Ruiz over Lowe if we're looking at them in the similar range? I mean,
no, I would take Lowe.
You would take Lowe, even though starts against lefties will be hard to come by. Because he's doing enough, even in the big side platoon role. He has done enough in a big side platoon role to make that a moot point so far. I'm not certain that's going to continue. I like Josh Lowe.
It's worth it. I mean, I think so. He also is the kind of guy, you can look at it, who gets into games when he doesn't start them.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're definitely looking for a chance to bring him in, even if he didn't start the game. And so he's not a full platoon guy where he's just going to sit on the bench for those other games. So I'm into it, but I there is some risk. Like Ryan McMahon is just really bothering me in my main because, yeah, I'm super excited to put him in when he's in Colorado, but then every time he's not in Colorado, I'm like, man, I know the numbers are going to be there at the end of the year, but they would be better if I had someone else to put in here. And then all of a sudden, I have to have another third baseman on my roster.
Yeah, it's
you see a weekend for Josh Lowe where you're just like, oh man, he's about to get 2 lefties in 3 games. I wish I had someone else to put in here.
Yeah, I was just looking at their upcoming schedule too. It's not bad. They've got a doubleheader this weekend, so they're going to see 4 right-handed starters between Friday and Sunday. They see all righties in the Monday to Thursday window, so 3 for 3 there. And then he does get 2 lefties next weekend, so he would have been probably in your lineup to begin this week, in, of course, for the weekend, in for next week, out for the following weekend based on that. 75% usage in those NFBC formats. Daily leagues are totally different. I think obviously in a daily league, there's a ton to like because you could just mix him and match him on the days where he's not playing. One more player I wanted to ask you about. I don't know if we've talked about him all season. Merrill Kelly. Merrill Kelly has an ERA under 3, has the best whip we've seen from him since coming back, other than 2020, which was about half as many innings as he's thrown so far this year. We've seen the K rate jump, a 27.4% K rate, way above where he's been in the past. The walk rate has gone up along with it, but the home run rate's come down. So just looking at the analog skills, much more good than bad. What do you see in this profile? Merrill Kelly jumped to pick 129, so that's up about 100 or so picks from where he was going at the later part of draft season. Are you looking at this as legitimate sustained growth, or someone who's probably had his best 2 months in the first 2 months of the season?
One thing that has improved, and it's an interesting thing to improve because he didn't really throw this pitch last year. He has a new pitch, the slider. And we're such a slider league that anytime someone adds a slider, even though he's only throwing it 4 or 5 times a game or whatever, I'm in. I like this addition because he is a guy that depends on having a lot of different pitches at his disposal, but now he has a third above average pitch by stuff plus, and slider curve change takes some pressure off of his hard pitches, which are not in the like Madison Bumgarner 67 stuff plus on the four seam territory. They're not terrible. They're just not great. He's your typical, kitchen sink type pitcher. But he's got the command that he had last year, and now he has an extra pitch. Not necessarily saying he's going to continue doing everything he's doing, but that is a recipe for believing in the higher strikeout rate to some extent, and the higher whiff rate supports it, and the new pitch supports it. So if I'm looking through, I'm going to shop projections here. Oh look, it started working. Nice.
The spreadsheet's back.
The spreadsheet is back. Does Kelly have an E in it on the back end?
It's just Kelly.
What?
It's just Kelly, the most common way.
But it's not finding it. I mean, Merrill Kelly has got to be in this. All right. Anyway.
A visual on the screen, though, if you are watching us on YouTube,
is me trying to find him.
Just covering our faces so you can't see our shame right now.
Am I just like misspelling all his names there? Here we go.
2 R's, 2 L's.
No, it's not finding it. I don't care. Well, you'll find out on Friday. But I just like this. I like this profile. It's the kind of guy that I like to bet on in season. It's the kind of guy that I like to have, a share or two of, later in drafts, because I think that you can drop them fairly easily if they're not there, and then sometimes you just get these pop-up seasons like Kelly's giving you right now. I don't really disbelieve. I disbelieve the 2 ERA, but I don't disbelieve that he's going to be useful going forward.
It's just a really strange thing to wrap my head around, that I would want to choose Merrill Kelly as like a third starting pitcher in a 15-team league. But what I popped up on the screen, by the way, if you are watching us on YouTube, and you should check this out, check out where he's locating his 6 pitches. Yes, he has 6 different pitches by Savant. There are some very sharp and specific location strategies with those arsenals. With the arsenal, I mean, the changeup that'd be down and in to righties. The curveball kind of down and away to righties if you're just trying to visualize it. The slider, same thing, or backfooting it to lefties. I mean, there's a lot to like here. It's a
really interesting four-seam fastball strategy too. I mean, yes, he's doing some above the zone, but his four-seam looks like it's designed to maybe look like his sinker and go to similar places as a sinker and a cutter, and then do different things, right? Mm-hmm. So it looks like he's kind of playing with that, like, oh, you think it's going to be the cutter, and so it's going to cut in off the plate, and so you lay off of it instead of the four seam, and it stays true and stays on the plate.
Called strike on the edge, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what command can do for you. I think you also look at these heat maps and go, oh gosh, 3 inches in the bad direction, and this guy sucks. But that's one thing that Location Plus tells you, is that in season, you can bet on something like this, but season to season, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, pretty interesting start to his year, though, for sure. And glad I just saw where he was going in those second chance drafts, because I don't have him anywhere, so I have not noticed how good it was until I saw that. One more question before we go. A bit of a long episode today, so apologies for that. If if that somehow bothers you and you're still listening, that doesn't apply to anybody. We had multiple questions come in about Nolan Gorman, and the basic question was, what are our takes? What do we think about his future potential? Is he a future 30 home run hitter, future 40 home run hitter? Where do we put the cap on his power ceiling based on what we're seeing so far in terms of his strikeout rate? And we know, of course, Gorman, there have been some questions about where he fits in long-term defensively. They played him up at second base already this season for him to qualify there next year. So you don't have to worry about anything along those lines. But where are you at in terms of Gorman's potential as an offensive player? Like, do you see him as a clear-cut, like, possible league leader in home runs someday, or do you see something a tad below that?
I suppose there could be some small limit on his home run potential due to his park, which has been playing in different directions. I kind of want to check that park factor.
86 for the 3-year rolling home run number now.
I want to turn it off. I want to turn the 3-year rolling off.
I'll race you.
Cardinals are...
Yeah, now it's a 122 again. This happened last year where it was playing...
They're fifth.
Early.
The fifth friendliest place for homers this year.
Yeah, but last year it did that for a while, and then it wasn't like that for the whole season, which was really strange.
This is why we use 3-year rolling.
Yes, this is... Why did you have me turn that off?
But because it's like it plays hot sometimes. Anyway, 23rd. I would suppose there, if the park plays the way it normally does, that I think they are building things around St. Louis, around the park, and the park factors can change. But anyway, I suppose you might want to roll him back from, just saying, on pace for 39 homers or whatever. I think I'd be more comfortable, projecting him for, 35 homers on the year. And I believe in that. I believe in 35 homers a year. This is outstanding raw power, outstanding barrel rate, I even love, he's not hitting 50% fly balls, so it's not somebody that's just, robbing himself to hit homers. He's not just trying to put everything straight up in the air like David VR or something. He's got a really good mix. I think that's partially why he's striking out less this year, is his fly ball rate's down a little bit. I don't know, man. I'm in the tank. I wish I was in the tank earlier. I did see the strikeout rate concerns. That's something that I don't always love. I know Michael Salfino, who writes on our site, was saying 30% strikeout rate in the minor leagues is a hard no for him. Gorman in 2022 had a 36.7% in 188 plate appearances in AAA. But he also the year before had 19%. So I don't know. I think this is a guy that can live where he's living.
I think the huge thing for me, and I'm with Salfino in terms of being alarmed by a 30% K rate in the minor leagues. I'm not saying that's a thing you shouldn't worry about. Where I think I want more information is in the age column. I think it makes a huge difference. If you're Nolan Gorman or you're Elly De La Cruz, is another example, someone in the minors right now, and you are 2, 3, 4 years younger than everybody else at your level, and you're striking out 30% of the time, that is much less of a problem than if you're age appropriate for the level. So I would always want to know more about the player in that regard before I make a real sort of judgment about swing and miss problems.
Yeah, and for a couple different reasons, which is that, A, the younger you are, the more years you have a potential strikeout rate improvement, since strikeout rate improves until about 26, 27, like many other stats. And then B, if you missed yesterday's Project Prospect, there was at the end a piece by Nathan Stoltz that pointed out that every year of age in the minor leagues is worth 25 WRC plus. So basically, in Double A in 2021, when he was 21 years old, it looks like 21.
Yeah, he was 21.
that year in Double A, when he put up a 128 WRC plus and a 27% strikeout rate, he was 2 years younger than the average player, or maybe a year and a half. You could ostensibly add 30 or 40 points of WRC plus to that number, and that puts that strikeout rate in another context, like the way you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd power. I think it's 40 plus home run power. I really do, even in that ballpark. And I think it comes with a better average than you'd expect for someone who swings and misses like that. I've compared Gorman from like a raw skills perspective to Austin Riley in the past. I think you could see Gorman follow a trajectory like that. If you told me Nolan Gorman's going to keep hitting the way he's hitting or something close to it for the rest of the season, where does he go in 2024 drafts? Probably somewhere in that 30 to 40 range overall, and it would be justified. So I think he's a really good long-term player. We probably got a little too hung up on the K rate and didn't take enough stock of the raw power and the overall production. He's been a tick below average at one stop. A 97 WRC plus is the worst he's ever been at any level while being young for the level everywhere he's played.
Yeah, and I think some of our concerns weren't necessarily long-term, but more short-term too, in terms of like, where does he fit on the roster this year? And I think, Jordan Walker's promotion and demotion has to do with this team, wanting to field a contender every year and wanting to win the next game. And if Nolan Gorman's had struggled at all, I think offensively, maybe due to a strikeout rate, then the defensive concerns would have been a bigger deal, and he might be in the minor leagues instead of Jordan Walker.
Exactly. I think that was more of an open question when the season began. We kind of
went 50% on the concerns, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we appreciate the questions about Nolan Gorman. Again, we had multiples of those, so I figured it was worth talking about him on today's episode. More questions to come on future episodes. You can send those our way, ratesandbarrels@gmail.com. If you don't have a subscription, $2 a month gets you in the door at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. You can find Eno on Twitter at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Riper. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.